Hey guys, Matt Gurney here, Jen Gerson here as well. It is the latest episode of the Line Podcast recorded on November the 29th, 2024. We got lots to talk about. First, we're going to get you caught up on some of the reaction to the announcement by President-elect Trump this week that he wants to hit Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs. We're going to spend a lot of time on that, as I think you can imagine. After that, we're going to get into some of the other big issues out there, including some of what I was hearing in Halifax. And believe me, there is some overlap between the two topics. Our third topic is going to play right off those first two. Liberals, we love you. It is time for Justin Trudeau to go. We're going to tell you why in our third segment. And then just at the very end, Jen and I are going to wrap up the amazing weeks we've both had. All that and more in the latest episode of the Line Podcast. This episode of the Line Podcast has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Canada can be a global leader in reducing the harm caused by smoking, but it requires actionable steps, including giving adult smokers the information they need to choose potentially less harmful alternatives. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
So, Matt, this week, President-elect Donald Trump made a great and fantastic announcement via Twitter X. 25% tariffs coming on his top 3 trading partners, including Mexico, China, and of course, us. I think this was the week, Matt, when I could sense the actual ripple and fear spread across the entire country as they realized, oh, shit.
Oh, wow. Sorry, Jen, I didn't notice. I hadn't heard that story. Yeah. I must have missed that one somehow. No, look, I mean, we're going to talk about some serious stuff on this podcast, but let me open with just a brief, I don't want to call it levity, but I think the listeners, the viewers, and certainly our fellow journalists will get this. Trump, with I think it was a Truth Social post.
Truth Social. Sorry, apologize.
Yeah, his own Twitter. When he released that, it was about my time, Eastern time. It was about 6:30 on a Monday night. And I had just gotten back from Halifax, and we're going to talk about it at some length later. I was tired. It was kind of one of those, I'm just going to pop my butt onto the couch, crack open a beer and a bag of chips, and I'm going to see if there's a hockey game on. And then Donald Trump tweeted that he's going to murder the Canadian economy, and just everything went to shit. And the reason I bring this up just purely for a moment of levity is because that actually feels very familiar, doesn't it? We all had 4 years of, earth-changing policy announcement via Donald Trump's social media post. We had 4 years. I'm not going to call them perfect years, but we had 4 years of where that wasn't the thing. And now we're back to it. And he's not even sworn in yet, and markets move on his every post.
So there's the first thing that we're back. Yay. And less prepared than ever before. So there's a couple of things that I want to start off this conversation with. And one is the giant CYA caveat. And that is, it's entirely possible. In fact, not even possible. We're talking 50-50 odds here. That this is all just a big throwing his dick around. He understands that he's coming back in for a second term. And he's just setting the table for hardcore negotiations, for another set of trade negotiations about getting a better deal for Americans. He will be negotiated down on those tariffs, or perhaps even negotiated into a place of no tariffs if he gets what he wants on a couple other files. I mean, border security is obviously one for him. So is defense spending, obviously, as well. It's possible that this is just the opening round in a negotiation, right? And that ultimately, Trump version 2 will be a lot like Trump version 1, so it's going to be a lot of strum and drang, but we'll muddle through it and it'll be okay. Totally fine. So that is my hey, entirely possible. Please do not use anything that I say in this podcast against me, because I can't rule out that as a possibility. Absolutely. However, it's possible that this is the other thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that because it is possible that this is the other thing, we have to take that possibility seriously. The other thing is that this isn't just some 4D chess opening move in a trade negotiation. The other thing is that, in fact, what you have right now is a Trump administration that is radically more empowered to make dramatic moves than it was in its previous administration. What you have is a Trump administration that's learned lessons of its previous administration, that's put into itself and is surrounding itself with people who are radical and who want to make serious changes. And I think it's also possible that you're dealing with actors here who aren't necessarily operating for what we would consider the most rational economic outcome. I don't think these guys are necessarily making moves and trade deals with an idea to improve the quality of life of the average American. That might not be their outcome here. Their goal might be to, quote unquote, make America great again, which would mean to assert American dominance and American emotional power at the expense of both friends and allies. If that's the case, then what you have is an administration that is perfectly willing to take economic hits, or perfectly willing to have its electorate take economic hits in order to score emotional or emotive wins, in order to win by its own metrics, so to speak. So if we're going to win in that game, we need to have a very, very clear understanding of what their win conditions are, and we need to be operating to what their win conditions are, not our assumptions of what their win conditions must be.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental difference here.
You know what?
So
yeah,
let's operate on the rest of the podcast with the assumption that he means it. Let's just, again, there's going to be lots of economists and people who are much better versed on this stuff who are just be like, look, it's all a game. Fine. To one possibility, you can go listen to that. We're going to operate this podcast under the political and economic assumption that he's dead serious. And not only is 25% not the opening gambit, but that this administration is willing to escalate way beyond that in order to secure whatever emotive wins it's aiming for.
You know, a great number of human tragedies throughout history have resulted from one side failing to understand what the other side actually wanted and meant and valued. And, you know, there is, and our fellow history buffs here at the line are going to know what I mean by that. There were assumptions way back when that Germany and France could never go to war because they were too economically interdependent. And then Germany decided it valued other things more.
Yeah.
And France was like, oh dear. And everything you're saying, I think, is correct. I agree with all of it. And I agree with you that the Canadian response to the threat of tariffs so far, and this includes obviously the public response, but it also includes some of the behind the scenes back channel conversations we're both having this week with officials, is that our greatest defense is our economic interdependence with the United States. They don't really mean it, because if they do this, it will hurt the auto sector. It will raise gas prices for Americans. All these things. And yes, it will. Like tariffs, especially if they're broad-based, will do those things. What we might not understand is that the Trump administration may be willing to eat that in pursuit of a different objective. And that is what we don't understand yet. And I want to throw two caveats at what you just said. I agree with them, but I am going to carve out a little bit of a narrow middle ground position between them for my first point, which is simply that we may be dealing with fundamentally rational economic actors. Maybe that is what we think their viewpoint is their viewpoint. But what we have to be on guard for is that we should not assume that this is the only time Mr. Trump will threaten us with 25% tariffs. So the 25% tariff threat was linked to what he claims is an unsecure U.S.-Canadian border. I think his claims are exaggerated in some ways. I think they're valid in other ways. And I think we're not blameless on this. We're going to have to address his concerns. But my concern / expectation is, even if we either do it or we do something that placates him, a day, a month, a year later, I'm sitting on my couch trying to find the Leafs, and there's another Truth Social post where he's announcing a 25% tariffs again, and that time it's on defense spending or money laundering in Canada or energy production, or we haven't harmonized our immigration policies, or we're laggard on taking on China. We should not assume this is going to be the only time we have to deal with this. Yep. We're going to have to get used to dealing with it, I think, over and over and over and over and over. And that obviously introduces the danger that one or the other times, even if he doesn't mean it, even if he means it as a bluff, or to deal hardball negotiating tactics, we might just fuck it up on their side, on our side, somebody's side. And the other wild card, and it's kind of related to the idea of the fuck up, I think we need to be careful, and I don't want to refer publicly to something, but Jen, you're going to know exactly what I mean. There is a very good possibility that what the Trump administration, I'm putting that in air quotes here, the Trump administration wants could change day by day, depending on the internal power, whoever's chairing the meeting. So you might have hard-headed economists in there who go, yeah, you know what, we're going to threaten the Canadians with tariffs. And then they're going to open up their dairy. They're going to do X, Y, Z. And then we'll drop the threat because otherwise we're going to arm ourselves. That might be the team we're negotiating with on a Monday.
Yeah.
But then someone has a bad dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and the next day we're dealing with a nationalist who doesn't give a flying fuck about the economics and hates Justin Trudeau because he's a progressive and wants to put Canada in his place because it pleases him.
So
that could be who we're negotiating with on a Tuesday.
So fundamentally, what we need to do to respond to this is get better information on the ground. I mean, again, this is something that both you and I have talked about, and we'll talk about a little bit later in the segment. We don't have ins in this particular feudal court, or not very many, and not very good ones. So one thing that we're going to have to get extremely good at is understanding the game within the game that Trump and his court are playing. And one thing we're going to have to get really, really good at is Trump Kremlinology. Who's in, who's out, who's sitting at the dinner table at Mar-a-Lago, who wasn't invited to the golf game, where's the local petty, blah, 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 blah. We don't have the people on the ground ingratiated with these people enough to have a really good sense of what the factions are and how the factions are at war, who's leading the factions, who's in them. We need to be real smart about that real fast. And right now we're not. That is on our diplomatic core. Yin in the game. One thing that, again, I mentioned this last week is that, Melanie Joly did a big round of, the U.S. diplomatics. She did a diplomatic round. And of course, we don't know everyone she might have talked to off the record. Not privy to them for information. But the people whom it was reported she talked to were people like Lindsey Graham, Nancy Murkowski, Reed, one of the Reeds. Anyway, these are fundamentally not people who are in the Kremlin. And we don't have either the connections or the contacts to know what we don't know in terms of what those internal operations are operating like. And because it's being led by someone as chaotic as Donald Trump, Matt, you're right. There's not going to be a single person in charge. There's not going to be one person on the file. It is going to change day by day, if not week by week, and we need to be on that like white on rice. The other thing when you were talking, I put my notes here because I thought of it, is one thing we do here in Canada, and we do a lot in the sort of secular West, is we try to posit material solutions to spiritual problems.
Yeah.
I've talked about this before. It's something that's been noodling my brain. I think it's a column I'm going to write eventually when I get my handle on what I'm trying to say here.
It'll be really uplifting.
Yeah, well, this is the problem. We think of ourselves as fundamentally rational, secular people. And if there's a rational, secular problem, we can throw money at it. We can throw resources at it. We can throw material at it. But when we are confronted by what I would term broadly as a spiritual problem, we're like, well, we'll just, build something, or we'll, put a check in the mail, or we'll put a GST check in the mail, and that'll fix it. That'll fix the problem, right? Because we can't conceptualize the existential, right? We can't conceptualize the metaphysical, right? Donald Trump is fundamentally a symptom of a deep spiritual problem in America. And I'm not talking about religious or that it's not Christian or whatever. He's a response to a deep problem of identity and a sense of moral order collapsing, for lack of a better term. You have to understand that what problem he's responding to understand the depth of what got him elected. And that is how you understand the game within the game. That's how you understand the win conditions by which we're going to have to learn how to operate, right? So again, I'm not necessarily saying this as well as I'm trying to say it because I'm still trying to figure out a way to articulate what I'm trying to say.
There's a yearning in the American soul, Jen, and we're going to show up and we're going to try and fill that void with 2% increased access to the Canadian dairy market.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yes, that's correct. So when Donald Trump is saying, well, the border is insecure, I'm not going to get into a giant debate about whether or not our border is insecure or how exaggerated it is, because that's missing the point. He's not having a rational conversation about how many people are actually crossing the border. He's talking to you about a fundamental American emotional insecurity that we have to respond to because they're our biggest trade partners and we're fucked if we don't. So like getting into some kind of nuanced policy debate with these guys about whatever bullshit he's throwing at us, and it is bullshit most of the time, but getting into some kind of like, well, we did make, a 25% increase into border, blah, 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 blah. That doesn't get to the heart of the problem. And it's not speaking the same language, and it's going to lead to a discontinuity of communication and bad strategy in our part. So that's just my observation. You can take it worth what you paid for it.
I have a 10-word answer to what Jen has raised as concerns about kind of the crisis in American identity. Okay, you ready for my 10-word answer?
Okay, go.
Just-in-time delivery of parts for the auto sector.
Sure.
I think that was 10 words. Someone in the comments is undoubtedly going to count them. Just-in-time delivery of parts in the auto sector. Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, all right.
Nailed it. No, I agree with you. Yeah, our expectations are a problem. We don't know what we're dealing with. And this is a big part of the column I wrote today. I know we're going to save most of the Halifax stuff for the next segment. But this is a big part of what I was trying to warn people about. And you and I were having a gab and a giggle earlier in the week because you would come off a phone call with some sources and we were just comparing notes on kind of our sense of how we think Canadian leaders are not even responding yet. We will talk about how they're responding, but I think we're curious more at the moment of how they're thinking and feeling, like where they are in their understanding of all of this. And I was telling you that Canadian politics, it was a silly example, but I meant this very seriously. Canadian politics is its own environment. There are rules, conventions, personalities, power blocks, power brokers, lived experience, all this stuff. Like Canadian politics is a thing. And entire generations of Canadian politicians and staff and fundraisers and columnists, guys like us, have evolved inside this ecosystem. What I was saying to Jen, and I put this a little bit in my first Halifax column, the ecosystem we evolved in was like Antarctica. And we're penguins. We are perfectly adapted creatures for that environment. But Donald Trump just used his Star Trek style transporter to beam us into the Amazon. And we're looking around and we're like, wow, it's hot. And we're not adapted for this environment. Generations of Canadian political inertia and training have brought us to a place where we have optimized this country and its politics to exist under a certain kind of America and American oversight and global leadership and protection. And if that kind of American global leadership and oversight and protection changes, we either adapt or we die.
Or we die as penguins.
In the Amazon. My God, it's steamy. And what is this strange slithering thing approaching me?
Yummy.
And yeah. And sorry, jump in.
Well, I do want to talk about our response here because, again, I think that right now Canada is groping toward a strategy of how to respond here. My sense is actually most of the leaders actually do get it. I think there is the dawning oh fuck that is happening or in the process of happening. What I don't think we have is a strategy for how to deal with it. And I think that the suggestions range from, well, we'll just tariff war them back, which I think I'm going to get into why that's dumb.
That's Doug Ford.
Yeah, to full, supplication. Mm-hmm. So what happened this week in the response to the 25% tariff is that Justin Trudeau held this like emergency meeting with the leaders of all of the premiers, trying to get them on Team Canada. Like we need to come up with a group strategy in terms of how to respond. And my sense was that Trudeau was trying to tell the premiers, don't go off half-cocked, don't grab their attention, which, by the way, is probably the right answer, because the people who did go off half-cocked after this announcement were the Mexicans. And I'm just telling you, free strategic advice here. Let the U.S. and the Mexicans fight. That's good for us.
We're busy for the next couple of weeks. Christmas is coming up. It's a busy time of year.
If the Mexicans and the U.S. want to go into a big fight, please allow Trump and his court to dissipate all their emotional energy on that. If that happens and we manage to keep our heads under the radar, that is while we fix some of the structural problems that we're dealing with, that's a good thing for us. We should do that.
Yeah, you know what? December is just a busy time of year. Like the kids are going to be out of school.
Absolutely.
Like I haven't done my shopping yet. I'm late.
Let's take some time to focus on what we need to do. But anyway, by all accounts, this meeting failed dramatically.
Oh, the Council of the Federation meeting?
The Council of the Federation meeting failed in terms of rallying the people to the cause of Team Canada. And we're going to get into that. One, you got Doug Ford now going off saying things like, this announcement from Trudeau is a stab to the heart, and if he does this, we're going to have to retaliate.
Announcement from Trump. Yeah.
Announcement from Trump is a stab to the heart. Different tea problem is a stab to the heart, and we're gonna launch our own advertisements, saying stuff to the effect of what is it has here? The Ontario Stronger campaign to try and convince the Canadians that we're stronger together, and blah 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 blah. You've got Daniel Smith, who almost immediately went off and said, America likes our oil, like our oil. And we're going to do more to handle our border security problems on the front with Montana. And then you've got Justin Trudeau coming out talking about Team Unity Canada. It's a fucking mess. And I want to get into this, why it's a mess. Okay,
can I tell you a quip first?
Sure, go for it.
One of my buddies had a great quip after that, when all the communiques were coming out of the meeting, where a buddy of mine said, the good news is everybody's on the same page. The bad news is nobody's read the full page. The worst news is they've all read a different part of it. And like everybody took that Team Canada one sheet, saw one sentence, and it's like, here's the plan.
Here's the
and
plan.
Daniel Smith saw the oil part. Doug Ford was heartstrings. David Eby seems to have vanished into an alternate universe. Francois Legault was talking about the border. Justin Trudeau is talking about, to your point about Team Canada. I don't really know what Chrystia Freeland was saying, but like,
I have a feeling that Chrystia Freeland went home and had a fat whiskey. Okay.
Well, who can blame her?
And who can blame her? So like, here's the problem is firstly, Daniel Smith's messaging. I don't even necessarily think that that's bad messaging or the wrong thing, but she's the wrong person to be delivering it. If that's the strategy, that needs to be coming from the federal government, because guess what? The provinces don't fucking control security, or we don't control border security. That's a federal government prerogative. Doug Ford, I'm sorry, we're going to be putting... Can we not have Doug Ford be at the head of the parade on dealing with the Americans? Can I just make a request on behalf of Canada on that one? The people pleaser who never met... No, the people pleaser who never met a flip-flop he doesn't like is not the guy I want on front on this particular issue, all right? Secondly, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Ford. We can't get into an escalatory or trade retaliation with Donald Trump. No, we can't. Because if these guys are willing to take it to 11, do you know what taking it to 11 for the Americans looks like? It's not a 25% tariff. If they wanted to, they could totally close the border tomorrow. You like fresh oranges and winter, folks? Because if they decide to go full crazy, and I'm not saying that they will. I'm not saying that, all right? The odds of them going full crazy are not high.
But they're not zero.
But they're not zero. And who do you think is actually going to get, could we hurt the Americans with proportionate tariffs on Wisconsin cheese or whatever? Sure, we could hurt them on that. Sure, we could marginally affect, or maybe somewhat seriously affect, some fairly crucial senators' districts with targeted trade tariffs like we did last time. Sure, we could. But you want to know what? They're going to hurt us a hell of a lot more than we can hurt them. Like I said, you like fresh oranges? You like fresh oranges and Christmas?
I do.
I like them.
I like Christmas
I like
and
them
oranges.
a lot.
I like them together.
This is not a war that we can win. And firstly, we know that, they know that, and they know that we know that. So like we can engage in some kabuki theater retaliation.
I'm not convinced that we know that.
Well, we need to get a clue about this. Like look, maybe there's, like I said, maybe there's some highly symbolic kabuki theater that we can engage in. And if we can keep it to the level of kabuki theater, that's great. That's a win for us. And by the way, I'm the sort of person who I'm like, oh, there's a bully. Let's go punch that asshole in the face. Like I am the most radical, like strategic pro-escalation person you will meet.
I'm not far behind you, but yeah, no, we're both wired that way. And we're both voices of reason now.
We're both fundamentally wired that way, but we're both also capable of remembering that, what was it, the Kids in the Hall skit where there's that guy who stay down. Like you're a midget next to an 800-pound gorilla.
Hello, subject, stay down.
We can annoy the gorilla. That's what we can do.
The gorilla can kill us.
Or it can kill us. So like we need to get a grip about that. And then the other thing that really got me going about this was the Ontario messaging. Ontario's Stronger Together campaign. Have you noticed that our provinces seem to imagine that they're going to have better success doing in America things that they can't do domestically? Oh, yeah, Ontario better together. Noticed. And yet we have interprovincial trade barriers left and right. We can't get along for 5 seconds straight. And yet we think we're going to be able to negotiate with America better. Like we don't have our own shit. We don't have our own house in order, guys. Oh, you think that Justin Trudeau is too much of a crazy narcissist to deal with. So you're going to take this directly to Donald Trump. So then here's my actual takeaway here, because Justin Trudeau and the Liberals right here are actually right. They're right. This isn't the moment for the provinces to be going off half-cocked on their own internal strategies, because if they do that, the Americans will be able to play us off one another. Okay? This is actually the moment for national unity. They are correct about this. The problem is that Justin Trudeau totally lacks the moral authority or the ability to generate that very national unity.
Yeah, I know.
He could have gone into that Council of Federation meeting, for example, or Council of Premiers meeting, and he could have said, you know what? It's time for us to put our domestic issues aside and for us to get on the same page. We're going to drop the emissions cap, Alberta. Here's a goodwill gesture to you. We're dropping the emissions cap in order to show you good faith, goodwill that everyone's on board. We're rowing in the same direction here.
Yeah. And Quebec, we're going to send you an extra $1 billion for shoring up all the facilities around Roxham Road. Ontario, we're announcing immediately a new working group that's going to help battle harden the automotive sector. To the Atlantic provinces, we're talking to you guys immediately about grid stability and infrastructure. Like, he could have come to the table with a message of unity and goodies, but
he didn't. It didn't even necessarily need to be goodies, because I mean, a lot of the stuff that Trump is demanding is stuff that we all know internally we need to get our asses together on anyway. So like there's a way that we can handle this where we get our own structural shit in order and our own house in order, increase capacity and development and cooperation between the provinces. This actually leads to good outcomes for us, while at the same time we put on a big show about how we're doing it under duress and Trump is making us so that he can take it as a win back to his base. Like there's a way to structure this, but that actually does require the provinces to be on the same page. It requires the feds to take lead, and it requires actual national unity. And I'm sorry, Trudeau, you don't have it. You don't have the confidence of the people. You're 20 points behind in the polls. You don't have the confidence of the provinces. You can't generate the unity that's necessary. And if you can't actually lead the country, what the fuck are you doing here? What are you still doing here? Like, I'm getting pissed off at this, not because I'm a liberal or I'm a conservative or whatever else. I'm like, dude, I'm scared about what's happening and the stuff that Canada might be facing. And I'm seeing a guy who's too fucking stubborn to realize that he's not the guy for the moment. We're going to come back to that point.
We are. That's because I have some further points to make on that in the other segment. That's going to lead us to a fiery third segment. And Jen, I need you to bottle that and then drink deep from it when we do the third segment.
Like cheap.
Yeah. Notoriously a beverage that amps up the nerves, right? Jen's, is it chamomile?
Have you know it's a lovely cream of Earl Grey. Thank you, from my indigo cup.
Earl Grey is my favorite as well.
I'll keep my powder dry, all right?
So here's the point I want to make that is distinct from where Jen was going, but related. And this is something I talked about with Jen privately earlier in the week. So now you all get to hear the slightly revised thesis, because Jen and I kicked this one around a little bit. I was thinking a lot about the penguins in the Antarctic, and I want to say something about our politicians that is offered in a spirit of generosity. They're generally speaking pretty good at their jobs. They're not good necessarily at government, but they're pretty good at politics. And one of the features of the way we have designed this country, and I think unfortunately to our increasing peril and misfortune, is that the Canadian Federation is operated typically on an adversarial basis, where the provinces will occasionally come together to gang up on the feds. The feds will occasionally smack down the provinces. The regions all play against each other. The provinces have their own backbiting going on between them here. And generally speaking, the people who have risen to positions of authority are people who have optimized their ability to succeed in an environment of intense internal rivalry and competition. Every once in a while, Doug Ford and Francois Legault get together and they swap Leafs and Habs jerseys. Danielle Smith comes to Toronto, talks to the Bay Street guys about how incredible Alberta energy is for the Canadian Federation. Everybody loves Atlantic seafood. Who doesn't love visiting Victoria, right? On and on and on and on. There are things that bring us together. But one of the easiest things to do when it comes to Canadian politics, if you need a quick bump in the polls, you campaign against those other bastards over across the Rockies or Laurentian elitists or whatever, right?
Sure.
Almost everyone who has had success in Canadian, and obviously Quebec, is just the uber example of this.
Yeah.
We now need to get all of these people who have excelled their entire careers at playing Canadians off of each other for local, parochial, literally provincial issues much of the time. We got to get them all rowing together. Like, is it possible? Yeah, sure. All things are possible. But I think what we are already seeing this week is everybody reverting to their part. Justin Trudeau showing up with the vapid message of unity and nothing to back it up, because that's what he does. Doug Ford trying to go rise to the table and be the senior partner of the provinces because we're the biggest and the baddest, and finding out that no one wants to listen to him. Quebec's going to Quebec because that's what they do. This is a separate topic, Jen. I don't know if the Quebec sovereigntists have figured out yet that sovereignty died when Donald Trump was reelected, but we'll save that conversation for another day. Danielle Smith going, ooh, how can I play this against those Eastern bastards? We'll play the oil card. Everybody's reverting to type. And I understand that. In moments of crisis, we all fall back on our truest selves. That's what we do. But what I'm trying to get these honorable individuals to do is to think for a minute. And I want to, so Jen, you've been dumping on my province for a few minutes. I'm going to dump on yours for a few minutes, but only for the purpose of making an example.
Sure.
One of the things, and I've teased you about this before, right here on the podcast, so I'm very much on the record. One of the things that I find adorable about Albertans, I love Alberta, I love Albertans, but you guys are cute. Because one of the things that seems endemic to Alberta to an extent that seems out of proportion to all the other Canadian provinces is that you guys don't understand how small you are. And one of the things that comes along in Alberta is like, I've joked about this before. Like I had a very smart Albertan, a prominent Albertan once wonder why the Greater Toronto area had twice as many ridings as the entire province of Alberta. I said, it's because twice as many people live here. And they were like, whoa, really? Toronto's that big? Like it genuinely blew their minds. They had never conceived of it. In their minds, Alberta's a province. Toronto's a city. What they didn't realize is that the Toronto metro area had more than twice Alberta's population. It just hadn't occurred to them.
I will also point out that, like, from an American perspective, Alberta, you're Oklahoma.
Well, that's exactly it. So Albertans, God bless them,
You're not
love you.
You're not even Texas guys.
No, you are
You're
like
Oklahoma.
Dakotas. Like, and Albertans have an unrealistic sense of their power within the Federation. So do Ontarians, so do Quebecers, all this stuff. But the problem is we've got all these people who think their kingship or queenship, let's be inclusive, of the Canadian Federation. They don't understand that they are...
Turd Island is what we call it.
They don't understand that they are, in many cases, ridiculously overconfident bosses of a sub-jurisdiction of a polity that is 1/10 the size of the United States. So I'm like, let's just do the fractions here. I don't care how powerful Doug Ford, Francois Legault, David Eby, Daniel Smith thinks they are in the context of the dynamics of the Canadian Federation. You are a supporting player of a subnational jurisdiction in a polity that is outnumbered and outgunned, economically speaking, 10-1 by the guys that you were negotiating with. Alberta is, as you and I know, Jen, lopsidedly wealthy. It is above the Canadian median.
But only lopsidedly wealthy
compared to Canada. It would be...
We're nothing special by American standards.
So roughly 10% of the Canadian population is Albertan. Let's give you guys a bump in your relative power because of your economic wealth. Let's say it's a 50% multiplier. So let's say you have the strut of 15% of the Canadian population. Let's go nuts.
Whoa.
Let's round it up to 20. And that's too much. You're not that economically powerful. But let's say you had the clout of 20% economically and culturally and politically speaking of the entire Canadian population. Congratulations. Your adjusted share is equivalent to 8 million Canadians tilting windmills against 350 million Americans.
To 2 Oklahomas.
So
look, and I think that the reason why we're making this point is not to shit on Alberta, which, by the way, I am
wake them up.
No. This is it's not beyond the realm of possibility that, and we're picking on Alberta because Alberta's just, we could pick on Doug Ford, we could pick on any of the provinces for doing this, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility that, for example, the messaging that Daniel Smith is taking to the public will work. Let's just say, for the hypothetical possibility, she gets the right person's attention in Trump land at the right moment, catches a wind. Trump somehow, or someone in his sphere, for some reason, listens to her press conference. Why? Maybe she's just lucky. Maybe it makes the rounds. Maybe she goes viral. Cool. Maybe she gets that wind. And Trump looks at this and goes, I like this woman. I like what she's saying. We will carve out an exemption for Canadian oil when we impose our tariffs. Like, maybe we get that win. Okay. Which, hope so.
That'd be great.
Great. That would be an incredible.
That for you.
I want that for us. Okay. Great. Maybe that's a success. I'm not even opposed to trying this as a strategy for this reason. But even if we get the oil carve out, if there's a 25% tariff imposed on the entire country on everything else, we're just as fucked as everyone else. We just still get some oil money coming in.
To use to pay for your $9 per oranges.
Right? The idea that we can, even if they do successfully play us off one another and they do give certain provinces certain exemptions and we manage to secure some wins, which is possible. If the entire country goes down, one province is not going to be exempted from this. We swim together or we die together as penguins.
In the Amazon.
So this is, and I'm not even saying that even if we do cooperate and get together that we win. Maybe we don't.
No, we probably still die, but
we go from having something of a fighting chance to not. So I don't know. This is just, I don't like the idea.
Slogan, firstly, bigger penguin together.
Look, part of me, bigger penguin together. But bluntly, I think our best strategy is actually to be ignored. Let's just be our best strategy right now might actually be say nothing, do nothing, be ignored, be really nice.
Your call is important to us. All of our Canadians are currently busy.
Beep, beep, beep. Also, I also don't like the fact that we are going to have to show some neck to Donald Trump. I am also morally and emotionally and viscerally repellent and angry about that fact. Okay, I am. Even if we're doing it for things that we need to do anyway and things that you and I have been calling on us to do anyway, even if we're doing it for that reason, I still don't like it. But you know what I'm more angry about? I am more angry about the fact that we have allowed our hard and soft capacity degrade to such a point that we don't have any other choices. These were us being subservient to Donald Trump on policy issues.
It's a choice.
That is the result of 20 years of choices that we made as a nation.
40, 80
years of choices that we made as a nation. We can correct that. We can start the process of correcting those errors now, but we can't do it fast enough. So there is no trade war as a viable option here. We're going to have to play the game, and we're going to have to play it better and smarter, and we're probably going to have to accept a certain degree of humiliation to do it. That makes me angry, but it makes me angrier that our predecessors put us in this position in the first place. That's what makes me really angry.
To anyone at the federal or provincial level that is listening, I'm just begging you to understand your usual play the game against each other strategy isn't going to work this time. Because at the best case scenario, Justin Trudeau's listening to us right now. And sir, you are captain of a team that is outgunned 10-1. And to anyone at the provincial level who is listening to us right now, you are a small subunit of the team that is outnumbered 10-1. And I really wish I had confidence that you guys got it, but I don't, because all I've seen so far this week is everybody playing to type. Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Costs are going up everywhere, and now streaming could cost you more. Why? Because the federal government has decided to tax your streaming services. That's right. They want you to pay more for the shows and music you love. This new tax could make life even more unaffordable. To learn more, visit scrapthestreamingtax.ca, brought to you by the Digital Media Association. So, this is going to flow naturally out of the first conversation, but I want to provide some context of my visit to Halifax. So our last podcast, Jen, I had arrived in Halifax for the Halifax International Security Forum. And again, organizers, thank you for the invite. But I hadn't been to the event yet. I recorded the podcast and then I went to the event. So everything that I experienced came later. I want to tell the listeners and the viewers just briefly what it is. It's an annual convention in Halifax. It's funded by the Canadian government, by NATO, by large corporate sponsors, obviously a lot of them from the defense industry, but not all of them. It brings together defense experts, military leadership, and other people from civil society whose fields of expertise generally matter in the realm of national defense. And there's a mix of social networking time, like pauses built into the schedule. Everybody go to the ballroom, get a coffee, get a snack. There's on-the-record sessions and there's off-the-record sessions. So that's what it is. And I've written one column already. It's online, readtheline.ca, check it out. And Jen, I'm going to tell you what that column is about, but then I'm going to tell you what I also heard at the conference, what I saw. And that's going to make up the bulk of my second column. So spoiler alert for all you keen line readers. One of the panels, and it was an on-the-record panel, Jen, so I can tell you what was said. Dr. Andrew Shearer is from Australia. He's the head of national intelligence in Australia. And I've seen him speak before. Very smart, very good speaker, very engaging. He's fun to listen to. And he had a question posed to him. And this is great because our last podcast, Jen, last week, we thought our last segment was going to be a quick little 10-minute talk about the rules-based international order. We ended up talking about it for 40 minutes. And the next morning, he was talking about it. And I thought it was fantastic. He was asked a question on the stage by a moderator. You know, we've talked about a rules-based international order. he was asked by the panel moderator, a BBC news journalist, are we looking at a changing global environment where there will in fact be two rules-based orders, where there'll be like a democratic one and an authoritarian one? And Schurer didn't answer that question. He answered a different question. He said, well, actually what we're discovering is what we have thought and identified as a rules-based international order was actually an American military power-based international order. And the Americans are pulling out. They're just changing the game. They might not withdraw from everything. American strategic interest is going to still involve the deployment or at least threat of U.S. military force in many parts of the world. Canada, for all that we were talking about in the first segment, we will probably still continue to benefit, at least overall, from the American security umbrella, because the Americans don't want problems in their northern yard. But what Schurer was saying is, if the Americans start to change the conditions of how they provide that security, what are the rest of us going to do? And I thought it was just so fascinating because it was really flowing out of the conversation we had last week. You and I are both skeptical about the idea of a rules-based international order, but maybe we just mislabeled it. Maybe the rules-based international order was what Canadian and European diplomats euphemistically began calling American massive nuclear and military security guarantee, because we didn't want to give the Americans the credit.
We called it the Pax Americana, was another way of putting it.
Yeah, but less and less. Like, that's what it is. But I think we've been calling it. And I think it might have lasted just long enough for there to be an entire generation of like IR nerds and legal scholars and stuff. They're like, no, the power rests in the UN or in the climate conferences. No, it rests overwhelmingly in Minuteman missile silos and carrier battle groups. And, you know, so people should check out my column, and that's on readtheline.ca already. But what I think is really interesting about the rest of the conference was great talks on and off the record. I felt pretty viscerally that Canada is being cut out. And we're the hosts. Everybody's polite to the host. But, you know, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. You might remember this. An American from Iowa or Ohio or something.
The purpose of the junior senator from Iowa who attended the event.
Well, he was responding to another comment, though, where like someone had basically said, I'm blanking on the guy's name. We'll get it for the written dispatch. But someone had basically said, if NATO ran itself the way Justin Trudeau ran the Canadian military, there would be no NATO. And it was blunt. It's like Canadians are deadbeats and freeloaders. And that was put to one of the congressional delegates at the conference, because there's always U.S. House reps and senators there. And he basically goes, yeah, that was kind of impolitic the way he said it, but it was right. And we all know it was right. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting to me because, look, I've covered these events before. I cover defense security issues broadly. One of the things I just want people to understand, and it's a subtle difference, but it's a real difference. The message isn't necessarily changing. The tone is changing. And that matters, because when people are at the point where they're just fed up, hey, clean up your room, clean up your room, clean up your room. It would be better if your room is clean. Wouldn't it be so much nicer and more organized if your room is clean? Clean your fucking room or I cut your allowance off. Oh, the tone's changed.
Well, do you want to know what else has changed? Just judging, and you were in Halifax, I wasn't, but something that we observed on this end, the messengers have changed.
There was a less prominent U.S. delegation than there has been in prior years. Still a lot of military personnel.
Yeah, it's not to say they're not going to show up. I mean, they'll show up to our event. That's fine. But like, it's the junior senator from Iowa telling us to clean our fucking rooms now. Right? It's not the Secretary of State.
The United States military was represented at a high level, but what was noticeably absent, well, two things were noticeably absent. They were related. No emissary from the Trump camp, official or otherwise. But one thing
that's also, a problem, guys.
Another thing that was noticeably absent was any discussion of Trump. It was a 3-day conference where we spent time talking around that issue. And it was It was the elephant in the room that no one wanted to admit was there. And there was one moment where, God bless him, but like a 4-star U.S. Navy admiral was reduced to like gibberish and then eventually self-effacing laughter and then like a polite round of applause from a sympathetic audience because he was asked a question and he couldn't think of a way to answer it. So eventually he just said, I'm not going to touch that. And there's a lot of that. But do you want to hear what I saw with Melanie Joly?
Yes, because we do need to talk. Now, Justin Ling also did a column in the Toronto Star about this.
Ling was there. I had a beer with him when we were talking about it.
I think your column will be a little bit more blunt in this regard, but please, I want to hear all about Melanie Joly, our foreign affairs minister in the Halifax conference.
So Bill Blair was there, Minister of National Defense. Melanie Joly was there, Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I think Minister Blair overall, I think his remarks were well received. And I think there is an understanding among our allies that Bill Blair means what he says and he's doing his best operating in the environment he's in. I don't know if it's true or not, and Canadian political observers may quibble with that, but I think the allies generally believe Blair is doing the best he can. I did not detect any of that sympathy from Melanie Joly. And it was not motivated, I could tell, by any personal animus. Everybody seems to like the foreign affairs minister. She's lovely from what I understand. But the people in Halifax at this conference were serious people in serious moods at a serious time to talk about serious things. And I don't think Melanie Joly acquitted herself well in that environment.
Could you get into specifics, please? Because they're hilarious.
I absolutely can, and I will. I will offer this out of decency. I don't know how she conducts herself behind closed doors. Maybe, sure. But on one of her, so she introduced one panel and she participated in another one. And I'm not going to try and quote it directly. I do have the audio of it, and it's going to be a big part of my column for next week. So I'm going to just beg the indulgence of the viewers and the listeners. I will have the exact words ready for my column next week. But she was asked a question specifically about foreign assets that have been seized by the Allies that are Russian. We've all been freezing Russian assets since the renewed invasion of Ukraine almost 3 years ago. And the question being put to Joly is, what is Canada going to do about them? What are they going to do with them? Other allies have been liquidating those assets or transferring them over to the control of the Ukrainians. And Joly's answer, and God, Jen, it was the proverbial watching a train wreck. Because I'm sitting there in the room and I'm like trying to beam psychic energy into her. I'm like, answer the question. Give an answer to the question. Give a firm answer to the question. Give a direct answer to the question. And then she goes, well, that's something we're talking about. And again, I don't have the exact words, and it was a back and forth exchange. But oh my God, someone who I trust, who is close to the Liberals, had told me once that Melanie Joly is a very smart minister, much smarter than she comes across, particularly in English, but that she's been over media trained, and in every public setting, she flops. I don't know if that's true or not, but what I do know is that me and hundreds of other delegates and participants at this fairly well-connected audience spent probably a pretty awkward 60 seconds or so looking at the Minister of Foreign Affairs of a G7 country in a time of war, being asked a specific question about a specific matter that called for a specific answer. And she was trying to fall back on dialogue, discussion, working on it. We're on it. Our allies know we're committed to them. And the moderator was not letting her go.
Okay, so you're being nice. Basically, this was at a panel, I believe, with Gary Kasparov, who's
he was the moderator.
Was a well-known chess player and just well-known genius.
He demolished
and basically,
her. He gutted her like a fish.
He gutted her like a fish. And like you weren't the only person who was there to note this. I mean, I heard about it from multiple sources as well. It was embarrassing. She embarrassed the country And I guarantee you, and herself, and frankly, that particular video, I'm sure, has made the rounds around every single diplomatic and GR organization globally.
When I left that panel, Jen, and kind of right afterwards, it was one of the coffee breaks, people that I know, even people I don't know, because I have my security badge on and I got a little Canadian flag on it. And people a couple of Americans I didn't know were like walking up to me going, who the fuck was that? And what was she doing?
Yeah. Okay. So look, I mean, here's the thing. Yes, we can always operate under the caveat that like she's a secret genius and she's just been neutered or lobotomized by the absolutely ineffective department that has become Global Affairs Canada. Yes, let's operate under that assumption that she is in fact a secret genius who's been overly media trained. We can only judge her based on what she says and does in public. That's the only evidence by which we have to gauge this woman's capacity and performance. That's it. That's all we got. Her actions and her statements. So if she's a secret genius underneath it all, that's great. But if it can't be put to use in public, then it's useless. She's as good as an IQ 85 if that's the way she acts in public. Okay?
Right.
Like, that's just the reality. Now, I understand that there have been, for 2 years, people have been very unwilling to say the very obvious things that have been said privately in public about Melanie Joly, because she's a very attractive woman and she's a very nice, likable person. And people don't want to criticize this woman in public because they don't want to be accused of being sexist. That's the fundamental problem. But like, as I said 2 weeks ago, before she embarrassed herself on the global stage with Garry Kasparov, this woman doesn't, whether or not she has or doesn't have the intellectual heft for this job is irrelevant. She doesn't act like she has the intellectual heft for the job. The allies don't take her seriously. This is well known. If she can work a room or has some secret skill happening behind closed doors, it's not an evidence to us. She's not fit for purpose. I'm sorry, she's very nice. She's very attractive. I wish her well. I don't mean any ill will, but she's not fit for purpose.
There's another part of all of this.
What else is there to say?
Well, there is actually one very important thing to say. And Jen, you're right. I agree with everything you just said. But there is one other element.
Sure.
She's not out of step with Trudeau, because I had showed you earlier in the week, what the hell was it about? It was, okay, Justin Trudeau was asked, I think it was in Ontario, but I'm not sure. He was at a press scrum and he was asked a question about the upcoming GST holiday. And the question was, are you going to talk to the provinces about offsetting any losses in the provinces that operate the harmonized sales tax? And Trudeau went, the provinces need to know that we have Canadians' backs. The provinces need to know that Canadians are hurting out there and we're going to do our best. And part of what I saw on the stage in Halifax, I do think you're right. I think we can attribute some or a lot of it to the particular political failings of Melanie Joly. But I also think part of it is that she is a Trudeau-era minister. And this is a government that has made a deliberate strategy, couple of exceptions aside, but in general has made a deliberate strategy of everything is a communications plan.
Yeah.
And Melanie Joly, when asked by Garry Kasparov, what is Canada going to do with seized assets, did not have an action plan to discuss or even to hypothesize about. So what she did was she communicated about values and Canadian loyalty and how Ukraine knows we have their back and how it's very important we work together as allies to come up with coordinated responses to big, complicated problems. And I'm watching her. And again, I agree with you. Some of this is her own personal failing, but it is downstream of a government that tries to spin its way out of everything. Couple of years ago, I took a vacation and I left behind, at the time, I was a National Post columnist. You'll know this term, Jen. It's called the Evergreen column. And I left a couple of them behind for the Post. I'm going to be off for a couple weeks. Here's some stuff that can run at any time, trickle it out the door whenever you need content. And one of the ones I wrote was that our allies have noticed that Justin Trudeau doesn't answer questions. At a press conference, he will reply to a question. He'll respond to it. But he'll respond to it by delivering a vaguely related talking point. And it will never be, well, thank you for asking. Here is the information you seek. It will be, here is a talking point my PMO guys ginned up for me. And your question's generally related to it. And I want to get this clip for the news. So I'm going to hit you with it. And there was this fantastic example in the 2021 election where Trudeau was asked a hard question. I don't even remember what it was about. And he kind of blinked because he wasn't ready for the question. And then he rallied and he said, "We will never apologize for standing up for a woman's right to choose." And like, you might as well have asked him, "Hey, do you want onion rings or fries with your burger?" And he makes an impassioned defense of the rights of Canadian women to reproductive health care. Yep. That's what Melanie Joly tried to do on the stage.
But Matt, here's the problem with that thesis is that Bill Blair is also a Justin Trudeau minister, and he seemed
Cops talk.
Well, and yet he seemed to be able to function in that room just fine. And yet our top diplomat, the person we appointed to be our top diplomat, is useless.
Yes.
Okay.
But I think I agree with you, Jen, but let's not think this problem goes away if we replace Joly. She's downstream of a rot in the PMO's reluctance to say or do anything.
Sure. And I mean, also she's downstream of a department that's notoriously shit. And also
needs to be blown up and rebuilt.
Needs to be blown up. And also a huge part of GAC, as we've written about in the past, is that it's hugely infested with highly ideological people who have a very interesting view of the world that is proving to be incorrect.
Remember we made up the Toronto Maple Leafs Award for Excellence for them?
Yeah, correct. We did make up the Toronto Maple Leafs Award for Excellence for them. Yeah. I've written about this and talked about this a couple of times in the past. I mean, these guys literally are operating under certain intellectual schematics that are failing and are just completely at odds with the world that is happening around them. I mean, one of the questions that Kasparov asked her about was something about the UN, and Melanie Joly, like a doe-eyed Disney princess, got up there and said, "Well, the UN's very important, blah, 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 blah." I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course. I'm like, nobody in that room has any illusions about the UN except the person apparently appointed to be our top diplomat in the country. Literally, she was the only one.
The old joke about it is better to be thought a fool than to open her mouth and remove all doubt.
Yeah, well, that's not a great role for someone who should not be opening their mouth.
Top diplomat. Yeah. Melanie Joly. It was just interesting because the vibe of the whole conference was really interesting this year. And I'm going to talk about that in the second column because I've been to enough of these things now that I think I kind of track the flow of the vibes. This was a serious, sober conference where people were coming to terms with difficult things. And Melanie Joly got up on that stage and she Melanie Joly'd all over it.
And also, can I also just point out, like, this has nothing to do with women. Like, I'm sorry, do you think that...
Well, Trudeau would have done exactly the same thing.
Well, no, but also at the same time, there are lots of women in this cabinet who would have done better. Anita Anand in that position would have been fine, or at least not embarrassing. So, I at a minimum, not embarrassing. Okay?
Sorry, Anita, we didn't mean it that way. Anita Anand, less embarrassing.
I think, okay, in case there's any dumb asshole on like Blue Sky who wants to clip this and make me look bad for making this point, like,
we're going to clip this part right back.
There's literally no reason why a woman can't be highly competent, effective, and capable at this job.
She just can't be that and Melanie Joly at the same time.
That's correct. That seems to be the issue here.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. We'll move on to the next kind of big take. Wrap it up because we're gonna tie the first two segments together in a minute. We're gonna with an editorial bow. But you did mention Justin Ling. And Justin was with me at the conference. We cranked a beer together, along with some of our other media colleagues. Always nice to see old friends at these things. And I don't think I'm telling tales out of school because Justin has now published. It was interesting. I published my Halifax column, and he published his the same day. Mine was on the line. He was in the Star. And what he was saying is we need a new foreign affairs minister. And we did talk about it a tiny bit because it was sort of the buzz after her faceplant during the panel, but only a tiny bit. And he obviously had some of the same experience that I had, which was afterwards.
Shame. The feeling was shame you're looking for. Shame on behalf of the country.
That's closer to it. How I described it to a buddy was looking at one of your friends pick a fight with their partner because they've had too much to drink at a party in front of everybody, and the partner just eviscerates them, but does it with kindness. and then your friend sits quietly in a corner of the house for the rest of the party because they know they fucked up, and they know they're going to get an earful as soon as they're in the car, but they also know they've humiliated themselves in front of everybody else. And you are also at the party and you're trying to pretend like you didn't see what just happened. That was the vibe in Halifax after Melanie Joly's panel appearance. And let me tell you one more thing, which is such an interesting, it's a one anecdote, such an interesting counterpoint. There was a delightful turn of phrase, and it was in an off the record session. So I cannot give attribution for it. And I wish I could, because I don't want to claim credit for it. But it was a woman. It was a woman from an allied country who described the entire vibe of the conference and the entire few months and coming years of history, where she said, we are being evicted from Maslow's penthouse. I just thought that's perfect. Because we talked about the hierarchy, right? But we were right at the very tippy top of the penthouse of that pyramid. And we're being evicted from it. We're being sent down to a lower floor. Mm-hmm. And that woman, again, from an allied country, saw it in perfectly clear terms. And guess what? Her first language ain't English either. And she articulated it perfectly in one sentence. And Melanie Joly spilled her guts all over the stage. Oh my God. Like and subscribe, I guess.
Yeah, we're fun. We're fun here today.
Okay, that's been a really uplifting first two segments of the pod. Jen, I hope you bottled your fury, because you were getting fired up in the first segment. The first segment of the podcast was talking about how unprepared Canadian politicians are, because of the weird pathologies of Canadian politics. Second segment of the pod, Melanie Joly is a representative of Trudeauian era liberalism getting gutted like a fish on a stage by Garry Kasparov. Third segment of the pod, Jen, you and I are both former National Post columnists. We are both identified as being generally right of center. I was the editor of the National Post editorial board. I know that the Liberals don't consider us friendly voices of reason, but right now I am begging you as a Canadian, for the love of Christ, please call an election. Like,
it's not even, it's look, if you call an election and you win, will have
fine.
That's fine.
It's
all
fine.
Right? That's fine. That would put you in a better position, and the country as a whole into a better position than this. This is a bad position. This is not a good. I mean, we're screaming into the void here. They're just going to assume, because they're partisans, they can't, because they operate for the good of their own partisan interests, they can't, and I'm saying this is both Liberals and Conservatives and all the other partisans, they can't operate in a framework that
of non-partisanship.
Permits the idea that there is actually something more important than their continued electoral success. That there are actually higher principles, and that they're just assuming that any call on higher principles is really just
deflection.
A partisan gambit. It's a weaponized attempt to create a partisan situation. We don't really think that it's good for the country to call an election. No. We just want to get Pierre Poilievre elected. And like, what these people don't understand is that we're actually, even though we're conservative-ish in our outlook, we are not partisan. We are not saying this because we want Pierre Poilievre to get elected. We're saying this because we think that if you continue doing this for another year, you're going to create an existential problem for the country.
We're already in one.
I'm going to go back to my original point here. You can't even get the premiers on board with a U.S.-Canada strategy because you lack the moral authority and personal suasion to do so, Liberals. You can't function in a crisis environment. It's like Churchill at war, except we're putting Mickey Mouse at the head of the prime ministership. Like, you can't. That's a terrible analogy, but in a crisis, you need someone who actually can bring people together, function, persuade people, have a vision for what needs to be done, a strategy that can and should be executed. The reason why the premiers are scattering the way they are is because you have failed.
There's no center.
You aren't there.
Yeah.
You're a vacuum of moral leadership.
Yep.
And the provinces are responding accordingly.
Yes.
You are the problem. And you are the solution to the problem. I'm sorry. I need to talk directly to Justin Trudeau here. I'm sorry, I do.
Prepare yourself, Justin.
Look, I realize he's never going to listen to me. I understand this. Look.
I'm confident people who will talk to him will hear what you're about to say.
My dude, okay, all right, my dude. I understand that you believe that you are here on a God-given mission to fight. I understand that you believe that that is a vocation. That is your calling. Okay? I get that. I understand that better than I think most people probably do because I understand the call of vocation very deeply. All right? I understand. I have to ask you what you're fighting for. Because if you don't call an election, you can't credibly claim that you're fighting for Canada. You're fighting for yourself at that point. I understand that you believe that you've been put on this earth to fight and that you get your sense of your purpose and meaning from that fight. But here's what I'm going to suggest. And if you're a man of faith, I would ask, have you been put on this earth to fight or have you put on this earth to win? And have you been put on this earth to fight or have you put on this earth to fight for something? Can you accept the totality of that vocation? I realize I'm having a bit of a cameo in the back. Yeah. It's really breaking the dramatic effect, but you're just going to have to roll with it because I'm not stopping now. Can you accept the totality of your vocation, which accepts that you might not be the protagonist in every fight? Sometimes you have to be the heel. That is the totality of the vocation of being put on this earth to fight. It means sometimes you fight as the hero, sometimes you fight as the villain, sometimes you fight and win, and sometimes you fight and lose. And if you can't accept the totality of that vocation, then you are doing a disservice to that vocation. Okay? You have to function in a space where you understand internally the difference between your interest and the national interest. Can you do that, sir? Can you do that, sir? Are you capable of separating these two or making that distinction? Because if you're capable of making that distinction, I have to ask you, are you putting yourself in the strongest possible position to advocate for the good of the nation in your current political setup? And if the answer to that question is no, then you have an obligation to change the political setup. I don't care if you call an election and win. That's fine. If you manage to get another mandate out of this, we as a nation, and you can turn that into, fine, we as a nation will be better and stronger off if you can do that. Okay? But stringing out this absolutely half-dead government that can't get legislation passed and has lost the moral authority to govern with the provinces for a year?
It is the worst thing they could do to us right now.
You will damage the country. You are hurting the country. Stop hurting the country. Stop it.
You know Jen means it. You know Jen means it when she grabs her hair and kind of flings it. I don't have hair, so I don't really know like the physics of that, but like you do a thing with your hair where you like kind of lift it.
It's like an anxiety response. I don't know what it is. It's a thing that I do, but you're right.
So
it's not even great hair. It's not clean. It's not nice. I didn't style it. I should keep it back in the clip, but I couldn't do it. The hair had to come out for this.
Well, my hair came all the way out for this and things like this. Okay. Jen has sent a message to Justin
That's my message.
Trudeau.
I'm sure he's tapped right in.
I'm confident
I'm screaming into the void here.
I don't know if it's going to reach him, but I'm pretty confident it will reach people directly proximate to him. I am going to send a message now to Liberals, not to the Prime Minister. Your boss is a spent political force. There's no there left. There hasn't been since the summer before last. I think it was a year earlier than that. But I think it became obvious to everyone, including a great number of you, that by the summer before last, summer of 2023, that Justin Trudeau was done. He does not, like Jen's talked about the moral authority to lead. Okay. I'm going to phrase it a little bit differently. He no longer has the political capital to lead. And if that wasn't true, you guys wouldn't be rolling out a $7 billion game show contest to try and get a temporary bump in the polls. If there was anything left of the Justin Trudeau of 2015, if there was anything left of the Liberal Party of Canada that we saw in the first mandate, the first majority term, 15 to 19, you guys wouldn't be Vanna Whiting all over the country to try and survive one day more. But that's what you're doing. That is where you are. You have got to know that. And if the boss isn't going to go to you, the gormless weasels, utterly lacking in grumba of the Liberal Party of Canada caucus, my message is simply this. And I agree with Jen, her daughter bursting in right now, totally undercutting the dramatic tension, but sometimes you just got to roll with it. But my message to the Liberals right now is very simply this. You know I'm right. You might not like me, and you might not trust me. But if I was wrong, you guys wouldn't have almost, over the last couple of months, repeatedly tried to throw this guy out. And you would not be rolling out your holiday-themed game show offering. I have tried to tell you guys, you gormless weasels, you feckless, grumba devoid, desiccated husks, it's going to get worse for you. Because when the holiday game show-a-thon fails, you're going to be the same place you are, except you'll have to do something even more pathetic. Try to imagine what that's going to be. Try to imagine where you are going to be in 3 or 6 months. If there is anything left of the average Liberal MP in Ottawa, you might want to also think about the country. All the points Jen just made. Because we have a lame duck leadership and a gutted like a fish foreign affairs minister. We had a defense minister who's trying to cop talk his way through these conventions, but all we've given him is hitting this target that will no longer be the target in 8 fucking years. That's what we're sending him out there with. I am begging you guys, if you cannot think of what this is doing to the country, I'm just begging you guys to think about what it's doing to you. Because when this gift-giving extravaganza fails, when you guys spend $7 billion that we could be spending on the military or on border security or on paying off the dairy cartel or on harmonizing trade regulations, clearing up the immigration backlog, almost fucking anything. Give it to the goddamn post office, end of strike. When it fails, you're right back where you started. And it's going to be worse because Trump's going to be in power. And it's not going to be tweets or what Truth Social, whatever, is from Mar-a-Lago. It's going to be phone calls from the White House. And you guys have nothing. And everybody knows you have nothing. That's the thing, guys. I want you to understand that it's not a secret. You aren't keeping it together for the kids, and we're the kids. We all know what's going on. You have to get rid of Trudeau. I agree with Jen. An election is the best way to do this. But even another leader, maybe even an interim leader, make it Prime Minister Anand for 6 months. Grab Mark Carney. I don't know. Justin Trudeau can't do this. He is hurting the country by trying, and he is hurting you. And the only people, my precious, gormless, weasel, garumba-lacking, desiccated husks of former human beings that are now the constituent members, the wisps of spirits that make up the Liberal caucus, you have to do this for yourselves because it will get worse. And I love you. And I don't want to see that.
We wonder why they don't listen to us. Oh my God. All right, there's one other message I have to make while we're doing direct appeals to the camera. Okay? Conservatives.
Well, this is going to break my heart. This could be so bad. What are we about to say? I don't
know. No.
We
it's
didn't rehearse this.
No. It's not going to be bad. It's if the Liberals cannot step up to the moment, you're the best of what's left. It's you. The moment to be stepping into the moment is probably now, which means if the Liberals can't generate the moral authority to come up with a strategy to deal with this stuff, it's going to have to be you. If the Liberals can't get the premiers on board to deal with this stuff, you have to make those phone calls. If the Liberals can't get the calls in Washington, the invites to Mar-a-Lago, the entrees into the feudal king's court, it's going to have to be you. And I think that, again, if the Liberals can't step into this particular moment of crisis, you're just going to have to end run them. I actually think you're going to have to end run them. You're going to have to start making those inroads, and you don't have a year to wait to make those inroads.
It's already too late. We're behind.
Frankly, we're already behind. You need to start acting as if you were the government for all intents and purposes, because the current government won't do it. So, there's a moment, Matt and I have been pretty skeptical about the Conservatives' seriousness.
Because they're penguins too.
Sure, of course they are.
Yeah, they're penguins too. They evolved in the same environment.
But unlike Trudeau and the Liberals, we don't know what you're capable of right now.
Well, they're not spent forces yet. They're not the
right. But
former human spirits from a Dickinson novel.
You may be capable of more than we are giving you credit for. You may be capable of being more than just shit posters. You may be capable of being more than just penguins, or at least being of penguins who can die with dignity. Show us that. Please show us that.
In the halls of Parliament, what was once the Liberal caucus just sort of moves ephemerally between and through walls and solid objects as they go from Parliament to the caucus room. They don't even open the doors. They just drift through them. And
we're having too much. No, we're getting a little too writerly now. Our metaphors we're going too far. We're going too far in some places.
Back to the Future. Every time Marty looks at the Polaroid of his family, they're fading because the timeline is diverging. And if he doesn't get his mom and dad to go on a date, he and his brother and sister will never be born. And he looks at that photo, and then his brother isn't there anymore because the window has closed and his brother can't be born anymore. That's the last Liberal caucus class photo. They're just fading.
Subscribe. Matt, we're just going to end off this segment by, firstly...
Really lift the mood.
Yeah, lift the mood. We're going to lift the mood. We're going to ground ourselves and perhaps compose ourselves just a little. We went a little off the deep end in the last segment. That's fine.
You said it well. We got writerly.
We got a little writerly. I mean, I do think that our audience will indulge us a little bit in that regard. We need moments of laughter and metaphoric beauty in our lives too. Also, please don't take anything we just said too personally. Take it seriously, but not personally. But Matt,
I said there were desiccated husks of former humans drifting through walls like desolate spirits, I meant it in a value-neutral way.
We're serious. We're not the best columnists, but we're the columnists that this nation deserves.
Not bad.
Where you get
pretty solidly okay.
You get exactly the commentators that you deserve. Okay? So if we're not it, you got nothing but yourselves to blame, okay? All right. Matt, your week. You wanted to talk about your week. I wanted to talk just very briefly about the fact that I testified in Parliament again. People keep on asking me back. I don't know why. I'm not nice. But anyway, they asked me to testify in a Senate committee.
Because you have physical form.
And apparently nothing else to do. I I testified at a Senate committee about the importance of the CBC in the West. I mean, people who followed me or my work before and know that I'm basically the only quasi-conservative person who thinks that the conservatives shouldn't defund the CBC. If you were interested into why, go check out the actual column on this point at www.readtheline.ca. It's actually one of the most popular
right up there, the top right-hand corner.
Yeah, top right-hand corner. So there you go, the conservative case for the CBC. So I was asked to testify in committee about my views on some of this. And I said, look, I think that the mandate of the CBC needs to be radically overhauled. And I think that we need to be way clearer as leaders and taxpayers about what we're expecting from the CBC. One of the major problems that the CBC has and has always had is that it's got a very, very broad mandate that's not very specific. And over time, it's suffered from mandate creep. I mean, they talk about their $1 billion+ budget being insufficient for their needs. And of course it's insufficient for your needs. When you're trying to do everything for everyone at all times, essentially your budget can and ought to be limitless. Your budget needs to be infinite to manage that. So I think a huge part of the CBC's problem has always been an unclear mandate. And I think also they're in a radical need of a mandate review in the face of the internet. I mean, the environment in which they are operating now is radically different from the one in which they were created. So that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to open the doors and hear from people about what they need the CBC to be. And it's also an opportunity to rebuild trust between communities and the CBC to do a serious mandate review. Not one that, Pascal St-Onge is going to do before she pops off and goes on maternity leave, but rather, an actual open door consultation process. And one of the things that I do think the CBC does need to be doing, if we aren't going to defund it, is it needs to be radically decentralized and it needs to regard itself as a local source of news.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a training mandate. Part of that.
The opposite of the national.
Yeah, it's the opposite. Basically, whatever the national is, do not that.
The also, extreme opposite.
Essentially, no more than 10% of your staff needs to be in Toronto. Like this needs to be a local news organization. It seemed to be a local news organization. People need to see CBC reporters in their community covering their events, talking to them at the grocery store, building human relationships on the ground.
Yeah, it makes sense to have a central editing hub, but it doesn't have to be in the most expensive real estate market in the country or the second. Put it in Winnipeg.
Put it in Winnipeg, put it in Calgary, put it in Vancouver, put it and have a lot of your national shows produced in these different cities. One of the major
live
problems
tonight from Moncton. Here is whatever replaces the national. Here from Winnipeg. Here from Regina. Yep, I agree.
Yeah, so essentially that was my practical overview, but I also think there's a bit of a spiritual sort of change in focus and tone that the CBC needs to embrace, and that is getting away from this idea that your job is to impose a vision of Canadiana on Canadians, and instead a much more grassroots up kind of way of representing Canadian to Canadians from the places where they actually live. And I had this really interesting exchange with one of the senators near the end of the hour that I was there, and she started talking about diversity. And diversity is a value, and what did I think about diversity as well? And it almost felt a little bit... Yeah, no, it almost felt like a bit of a gotcha question, because I just started asking, well, what do you mean by diversity? And she's like, well, whatever you want it to mean, diversity of blah, 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 diversity of opinions, blah, blah. She was setting me up for some kind of, discrediting rant about the importance of diversity of perspectives and diversity of opinions over diversity of ethnicity. And I just didn't take that bait. I said, look, the problem that I have with the concept of diversity is that it doesn't mean anything. It's just a really hard value to be building a mandate around because it doesn't have a clear meaning to anybody. Like it's a nice sounding word. Yeah, I mean we all want diversity. I mean, I want lots of different people in my organization. Of course we do. But what the fuck does it mean beyond that? Does it imply quotas? What kind of diversity are you looking for? I sort of also hate this idea of diversity because it just says, okay, well, we need diversity of opinions. So therefore we need one conservative and one liberal and one NDP person and one Bloc person. But okay, so you put me on your panel and I'm your quote unquote conservative. How many movement conservatives think of me as a conservative, a representative conservative? There are 15. I'm going to get 0. There are 15 different varieties of conservative. Are you going to represent all of them in your diversity quota? I mean, this is...
Yeah, for this segment, I'm the national security hawk, but the next time I'm the Bible thumping SoCon.
Yeah, like this is nonsense. You can't reduce individual people with vibrant sort of collectives of views to a box and a quota that way. You can't even really reduce people to ethnic quotas very easily half the time, much less their ideological positions. So I said, look, it's just the wrong value set to be building a national mandate around. I think that the value you need to be building a national mandate around, if you're going to keep the CBC, is a value of service. It's service. It's no, we are going to serve our communities. We are not going to impose values upon those communities. We are going to be in those communities and being of use to those communities. That is the core value. And that's what I think a lot of the CBC has gotten away from. And I think to its detriment. Like, you aren't being of service by taking the latest journalistic fad coming out of Colombia and imposing it on Lethbridge or Medicine Hat or in Inuvik, right? Your duty is to be in and of these communities so that you can understand what they need from you and be of service to them. And that means decentralizing power to these communities in a very significant way. And it also is a value that I think requires all of the reporters who operate in these communities to be open-hearted and have a high degree of humility and being willing to listen to these communities and build connections with them. That's the core value that I think you have to build any kind of taxpayer-funded institution around. And I mean, even here at The Line, like, we're not a taxpayer-funded institution. We're one of the few journalistic organizations that isn't a taxpayer-funded institution.
Never a bad time to remind people we accept zero subsidies.
We accept zero subsidies. But I still think that our mandate is one of service. We are of service to an audience. Our duty and our role is to provide analysis and insight and thoughts on the world that our audience find valuable, some of them valuable enough to pay for, because they honor that we're trying to be of service to them. I think
I do it so that the thoughts don't accumulate and keep me up at night. But yes,
there's an alignment of how should I say this? Neuroses and duty. Let's just say that sometimes there's a beautiful alignment of that. But I think a journalism that loses sight that your role is to be of service, and to be of service is an honor, is a journalism that loses its ability to create a real and meaningful connection with an audience, and therefore loses its institutional credibility and mandate. So
that's beautiful.
Anyway,
I'm not even being sarcastic. I was breaking the Liberals' balls a few minutes ago, but I actually think what you just said was lovely. No, and I agree with that, Jen. It's not something we've ever really articulated that way, but you or I have accumulated more than enough of a Rolodex that we could cash it in for a largely anonymous job that would pay us a lot of money, and it would have great work-life balance and expense account. We'd get to do some interesting travel. We'd meet interesting people, but we like what we do. And there is a service component in this. There's also other selfish reasons we do the work we do. We're not saints, but there are other ways.
It's also a lot of fun.
That's one of the perks. But there are other ways to make the amount of money we do. And there'd be a lot of ways to make the amount of money we do while working less and being hated less on the internet and things like that. But no, there is an element of service here. I honestly believe that every once in a while, something I say matters, and that I help someone, that I help fix a problem. I shine a light on an injustice. Is this always the case? No. And I know that because I go out and I write columns about my favorite Star Trek show or Rush. So I don't get up every day like, how can I make the world better? But sometimes I get to do that. And that helps make some of the dark days better. Is this a logical place, Jen, for me to tell people about my week?
I think it's a perfect place for you to tell people about your week. And again, apologies for the cameos in the background. So my daughter has been kind of breaking in and out. She's home from school today. So
is she sick or is it a PA day?
No, it's a PA day. So here you go.
It's a PA day for me too, but I just told my kids to take the debit card and walk to the convenience store. Look, sad news in my neck of the woods this week. TVO, the Ontario Public Broadcaster, and a place where I had been a freelance contributing columnist, for the last 6 years, has restructured. And my original impression was that they had ended their contribution to journalism and were refocusing entirely on an education mandate. I've since learned that was not entirely correct. They have ended their digital journalism footprint, which for the purposes of TVO largely meant text. They will still be producing documentaries and airing documentaries. They will still be producing The Agenda with Steve Paikin, and they will still be producing some podcasts. So I was wrong about that in my initial statement, and once informed, I corrected the record, as I was happy to do. But I'm going to make the point, and I know Steve Paikin. I love Steve Paikin. I'm a personal fan of his, personal friend of his, and I love some of the TVO's podcasts, and TVO has done some fantastic documentaries over the years. None of them are the same as having a newsroom churning out text content every day. There's just nothing that has yet come along that has replaced that in the media ecosystem, which is why even as we here at The Line produce podcasts, we never forget, as talking about service, as Jen said a minute ago, the heart of The Line will always be the written word, because that is the most powerful means of human communication ever invented. I'm not going to cry for myself, because the end of the digital operation obviously means the end of my column, which is fine. Like a weekly column does not threaten my financial health. But for dozens, I believe, I've heard up to 24 people who were let go following on job cuts at Rogers, at Chorus. I'm just reading just this morning about cuts landing at CJOB in Winnipeg, which is another round of Chorus cuts after the one a couple of weeks ago. It's a hard time to do the work that we do. And this time it landed pretty close to home, and I took a little collateral damage from it. But my thoughts mainly are with a great team of colleagues that are now finished, and they're wondering, just as the holidays approach, what are they going to do? And others all across the country in podcasts and radio and television facing similar cuts. Plus, Jen, as you and I have talked about, and we've tried to warn the listeners and the viewers about this many, many, many times. If Pierre Poilievre is elected, and we think he will be, and if he does what he says he's going to do, which is scrap the media subsidies and kill the CBC, I think he will do both of those things. The majority of the private sector media in this country will be dead in 60 to 90 days. And I don't know if the public gets it. But Post Media, and I don't think Torstar either, can survive without government subsidy cash flow. They're done without it. So shout out to my team at TVO. They were a genuine pleasure to work with. Shout out even to the managers there. I've made some public comments expressing my displeasure with the decision to close the newsroom, but they were, from my perspective, always professional to work with. You know, working for an Ontario public broadcaster, strafing Doug Ford a couple times a week, I never had a word of complaint. They never tried to nudge me. They never tried to tame me. Thank you for all of that. And as I've already said to them in writing and on the phone, I thank them for the opportunity, Jen, as you said, to serve. What I do know now, though, is that we are, as a country, heading into a moment of pretty extreme geopolitical and likely domestic political crisis. And we're dumber and blinder than ever, because all of these systems that exist to inform the public and the electorate, they're winking out, and there is no replacement for them. To my team, I am sorry. To everyone else, good luck.
On that note, it's a perfect ending to say, like and subscribe to The Line. Come check us out. We are surviving in our tiny little Substack-riven life raft, and we will continue to do so as long as we have enough of your support to continue to be of service to you. Check us out, www.readtheline.ca.